Welcome back. Tonight, we're slipping into a world that's been painted 1,000 times in brushstrokes and ink, Feudal Japan. But we're not wandering through samurai duels or dramatic clan wars tonight. There's no armor to polish, no swords to draw. This isn't the Japan of epic legends or battlefield glory. Instead, we're stepping into the quiet folds of daily life. A place of wooden sandals and slatted doors, early risers and smoky hearths. A world shaped more by rice harvest than by royal edicts. We'll be wandering through a simple village nestled in the shadows of low mountains. Not to change anything, not to chase a name, just to see what it felt like to wake, eat, work and sleep in a time that ran on seasons and rituals. So let your breath slow, let the world outside dim. We're going to travel gently through a day long past. Whether you follow every word or drift off after a moment, the village will carry on. The first light over the valley doesn't rush. It rolls in with the fog, soft and pale, brushing against thatched rooftops and the lacquered tips of temple bells. In the countryside of feudal Japan, the day begins before the sun clears the trees. In one wooden home, narrow and cool, a farmer stirs. He sleeps on a tatami mat with a thin futon, packed away each night and unfolded again when the air grows heavy with sleep. The walls are thin, paper and wood, and the sound of the outside world filters in easily. A crow, a neighbor coughing, the shuffling steps of someone heading out with a pail. There's no dramatic ceremony to waking up here. The morning is functional. A short trip to the well, a splash of water on the face, a quick bow to the family altar, where the smoke of yesterday's incense still lingers. Breakfast is humble, some rice if they have it, pickled vegetables, and maybe miso soup steaming in wooden bowls. The home is dim inside, lit only by sunlight creeping through slatted shutters. Children stretch and yawn. One girl braids her sister's hair with practiced fingers, tying the end with a strip of old fabric. There's no rush, just a rhythm, a knowing of what comes next because it came yesterday and the day before and likely will tomorrow. By the time the mist begins to lift from the paddies, most of the village is awake. Some carry baskets, others sharpen tools, and a few wander toward the temple to offer the first prayers of the day. By mid-morning, the heart of the village is already beating in rhythm with the fields. Rice isn't just a crop here. It's the calendar, the currency, and the lifeline. And so, most villagers spend their days knee-deep in the paddies, under a sky that doesn't care if it's harvest season or planting time. It just keeps moving. The fields are geometric, flooded, and humming softly with frogs and insects. A boy no older than 10 rolls up his sleeves and follows his mother into the shallow water. It's cool against the skin. He squints at the sun reflecting off the water's surface, trying not to lose his footing in the mud below. Each step is a squelch, each handful of seedlings planted with practiced care. Older men wear wide straw hats, shielding their faces from the rising sun. Some bend slowly, backs creaking, planting one stalk at a time. Others weed with a quiet patience, moving methodically row by row. No one speaks much. There's not a lot to say when you're surrounded by water and sky and the steady plunk of rice being set in place. It's not glamorous work. It's repetitive and wet and sometimes thankless, but it's respected. Rice is what feeds the village, what gets counted and taxed, what sustains samurai and merchants alike. Even those with only a small plot of land understand the weight of it, this muddy lifeblood of the countryside. Occasionally, a breeze passes through and sets the water rippling. Birds scatter. The girl from earlier pauses to stretch her back and adjust the sash around her waist. She's quiet, but her eyes catch her brother's, and they exchange the smallest smirk. It's the only break they'll get until noon. Along the road beside the paddies, a cart creaks past, pulled by an ox with more wrinkles than muscle. The driver nods to the workers, who barely look up. Their hands are busy, their feet soaked, their minds steady. No one is counting minutes here. Time is measured by the sun's angle and the call of the temple bell. And as long as there's rice to plant, the day rolls on, slow and muddy and ancient. By the time the sun settles high overhead, the village is fully awake. It doesn't hum like a city, not with traffic or shouting or the clang of metal on stone. Its sound is softer, woven from footsteps on packed earth, the clatter of wooden sandals, the low murmur of conversations that never rise above necessity. Homes line the narrow paths, built from timber and wattle, their roofs thick with thatch. Smoke curls gently from the openings at their peaks, carrying the scent of miso soup and charred fish. A woman squats near a doorstep, slicing daikon with practiced ease. Her knife is old but sharp, handed down by her mother, and probably by her mother before that. Each slice lands with a soft tap on the worn wood of the cutting board. Her baby naps in a sling on her back, oblivious to everything but the slow rhythm of her movement. The village well is where most of the chatter happens, if you can call it that. A few women draw water in turns, exchanging nods, sometimes a comment about the weather or the quality of the millet this year. One shares that her neighbor's daughter is getting married soon. There's no gossip, just facts passed along with buckets and rope. A pair of children chase each other around the edge of a chicken pen, giggling until one trips and the other stands victorious, hands on hips like a great general. A rooster squawks its disapproval, offended by their disruption. The village carpenter is already at work, shaving down lengths of bamboo. He sits cross-legged in the shade of his workshop, surrounded by curls of wood like petals from a tree. Each stroke of his plane is deliberate, smooth. He's making a new ladle for the temple bathhouse, and though it's not a grand commission, he treats it as if it were. There's no rush, no one hurries. There's always something to do, repairs to make, pickles to jar, sandals to mend. But the day is long, and the village has learned how to stretch it gently, like dough resting in a bowl. Nothing is wasted, not time, not movement. Even the dogs seem to know this. One dozes in the shade, only lifting its head when the wind brings the promise of food. And then, just as quickly, it drifts back to sleep. Step inside a modest farmhouse on the edge of the rice fields. The floor is packed earth, swept clean but uneven in places, smoothed by years of feet passing over it. Sunlight slips through bamboo slats and paper windows, casting soft geometric patterns onto the walls. It's quiet here, not silent but calm. The kind of quiet that comes from being far from warlords and castles, deep in the rhythms of a village that minds its own. A pot bubbles over a sunken hearth in the center of the room, the fire beneath it low but steady. The smoke curls upward and escapes through a vent in the roof, leaving just enough of itself behind to remind you that someone's cooking, maybe barley rice, maybe a soup with wild greens and pickled plums, something simple, nourishing, the sort of food that disappears without fanfare and leaves you full anyway. A woman kneels near the fire, not hurried, turning the pot with a wooden spoon. Her sleeves are tied back, her hair pinned up. She hums faintly, nothing with a melody, just a few repeated notes that rise and fall like the flame. Behind her, a child plays with a set of carved wooden animals. A cow, a fox, a crane. He lines them up, then knocks them over one by one, declaring which one wins. It's always a crane. Hanging from the walls are the tools of daily life. A woven basket, a straw raincoat, a sickle. Not many things, but each one earned its place. In the corner rests a futon, neatly folded and wrapped. It will be unrolled again when the sun disappears. For now, it waits without complaint. Outside the doorway, sandals are lined up neatly on the step. You never wear them inside. Everyone knows this, even the child, who once tried to sneak them past the threshold and was met with a disapproving look sharp enough to stop him mid-step. The air smells of soot, rice, and old wood. It's a smell of permanence, not the kind carved in stone, but the kind built from repetition, from doing the same things in the same way for a very long time, and finding comfort in that. It's market day, and the village path is no longer empty. The narrow dirt road is alive with sandals slapping earth, wheels creaking under carts, and voices trading news, gossip, and goods. Someone's selling fresh miso, another dried fish. A man shouts the merits of his charcoal. A woman lifts a bundle of radishes proudly, their red roots still wet from the morning pool. There's no grand sign or announcement, just the knowledge that on this day, at this time, this patch of the village becomes a market. The stalls are simple, cloth stretched over bamboo frames, or just a mat on the ground with goods neatly arranged, rice crackers wrapped in paper, strips of cloth dyed in indigo, a pair of getter sandals carved from scrap wood, still smelling faintly of sawdust. Children weave through the crowd with sticky fingers and wide eyes. They're not shopping, they're here for the spectacle, to watch the travelling peddler with the dancing monkey, to sneak a sample of roasted chestnuts when the vendor turns his back, to pretend they're important, negotiating for a toy top like their parents barter for fish. A samurai on horseback passes through slowly. People bow, subtly but unmistakably. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. His two swords say enough. He isn't here to shop, just to remind everyone that the local lord's presence lingers even when his banners aren't flying. Near the edge of the market, a man grinds soybeans with a worn stone mill. It creaks with every turn. He doesn't rush. No one does, really. The point isn't speed. The point is that the work gets done, the meals get made, and the stories get told. A woman beside him sells pickles in ceramic jars. She laughs with a neighbour about someone's stubborn cow that keeps escaping its pen. Everyone knows the cow. Everyone's helped catch it at least once. The smells here are layered: wood smoke, fermented miso, fresh produce, and people. The air is thick with history in the making, but no one's writing it down. They just live in it, and when the sun begins to dip, the vendors pack up with the same unspoken rhythm they unpacked with. The crowd thins, the dust settles, and for another week, the road goes quiet. Step through the low wooden doorway, and you'll have to duck. Not because the builders were short, but because homes in feudal Japan were built for function, not flourish. Inside, it's cool and dim. The summer heat stays mostly outside, held back by thick thatched roofing and walls of earth and timber. Light comes in through paper windows, washi stretched over a wooden lattice, glowing softly like rice lanterns. The air smells faintly of smoke and straw. A fire pit, or airari, sits at the center of the room. It's not just for cooking. It's the heart of the home. It provides warmth, dries clothes, and occasionally threatens to smoke out the whole room when the wind shifts the wrong way. There's no furniture to speak of, at least not in the way you might imagine. People sit on woven tatami mats, their legs folded neatly beneath them. Cushions, if they exist, are flat and firm. Meals are taken from low trays or small tables, brought out when needed and put away when not. A pot simmers over the fire. Rice, of course, and maybe a few vegetables. If it's a good day, there's miso soup and a bit of pickled plum. Protein is a luxury. Fish, if it's near a river. Tofu, if it's market day. Meat, almost never. In the corner, a child hums softly while threading straw for sandals. Nearby, an elder dozes, upright, head nodding slightly with each breath. There's no rush to finish, no ticking clock, just daylight and dusk, meals and seasons. Shoji screens separate the space. Privacy exists in spirit, not in fact. If someone's angry or laughing too loud, the whole household knows. But grievances don't last long. They're swept away like dust before dinner. Above, bundles of herbs hang from the rafters, medicinal and otherwise. A few tools lean in the corner, a hoe, a basket, a broom made of twigs. Each has a place, and everything returns to its place. A tidy home is a respectful one. At night, bedding will be unrolled from storage, futons layered on the tatami, shared by siblings or spouses, depending on what space allows. Tomorrow will be another day of fieldwork and quiet rituals, but for now, the house hums with soft, lived-in stillness. A village in feudal Japan never truly falls silent. Even in its quietest moments, there's always a murmur. The steady rhythm of footfalls on packed earth, the creak of a wooden cart wheel, the distant clack of a bamboo water timer tipping over. It's a subtle symphony, never intrusive, but always present. You live with it like the wind, like the smell of damp soil. As the sun climbs, the village begins to stir. Children dash between homes, their laughter cutting through the morning fog like birdsong. Roosters crow too late to be helpful. Dogs bark at nothing in particular. It's chaotic but gentle. Everyone is everywhere, and yet nobody seems rushed. At the edge of the village sits the well. It's not just a place to fetch water. It's the unofficial town square. People linger there long after their buckets are full. Gossip drips faster than the water. Whispers about a merchant from Edo, a daughter old enough for marriage, a neighbor's unlucky harvest. It's not malicious, just life shared aloud. Nearby, a woodcutter sharpens his blade, pausing now and then to exchange nods with passers-by. A pair of elderly women sit weaving, hands practiced and fast. They've told the same stories 100 times, but they laugh every time as if it's the first. The punchlines land the same, and nobody minds. Sometimes, a traveling monk passes through. He bows, offers a chant or prayer, and continues on. The children stare, wide-eyed. The adults nod in respect, though some quietly hope he's not here to ask for rice. For special occasions, a festival, a coming of age, or the rare rice surplus, the village transforms. Lanterns strung between trees, drums echoing across the fields, faces painted, bells tied to sleeves. These are rare but cherished moments. No one forgets them, even when the sake wears off and the morning's chores return. In a village like this, you know every face. You borrow salt without asking. You return borrowed tools without a word. You eat from the same pot when needed, grieve at the same funerals, and celebrate every first snowfall together. Privacy is thin, but connection is thick. Here, you're never really alone, even when you wish to be. By mid-morning, the village heart has shifted to the fields. Rice is the currency of life, and every stalk is a quiet investment in survival. If you live here, chances are you spent more hours ankle deep in mud than anywhere else. The paddies stretch across the land like green mirrors, their shallow waters catching sky and cloud. You can see your reflection if you look down long enough, though most don't. There's work to do, always. Planting begins in late spring. Bent spines and calloused hands mark the season. Every seedling must be placed just right, not too shallow, not too deep. Elders claim they can smell a good planting. It's a poetic way of saying they know what they're doing. By summer, it's all maintenance, clearing weeds, adjusting water levels, fending off birds that somehow know exactly when to strike. A single scarecrow guards an entire patch, its straw hat tilted with resignation. No one expects it to succeed. It's symbolic, a kind of shrug in the shape of a man. Come autumn, the fields transform. Lush green yields to golden brown. The harvest begins with a rhythm that's part ritual, part endurance test. Sickles flash under the sun. Hands move faster than thought. Families work side by side, sweat soaking into their sleeves. Children help where they can, carrying bundles, chasing off crows, or just getting in the way. Everyone's tired, and no one complains, at least not loud enough to be heard. Every handful of rice carries weight, not just physical, but emotional. It's taxes, meals, offerings to ancestors, and trade all bundled together. Too little means hunger. Too much, and maybe you've attracted attention, of the taxing kind. There's a saying among farmers here, the rice does not grow from your shouting, but from your sweat. It's true, and everyone knows it. Still, some shout anyway, just to feel like they're doing more. When the day ends, the field doesn't forget you. Mud cakes your legs, sun lingers in your skin, and your clothes smell faintly of wet earth. You'll wash it all away later, but part of you will still be there, in the rows, the water, the stalks bending just so. It's not glamorous, but it's everything. Even if you're not one, you always know when a samurai is near. They don't announce themselves. They don't need to. The daisho, the paired swords, one long, one short, speaks louder than words ever could. Carried at the waist, they're not just weapons but symbols of class, of permission, of danger if disrespected. A samurai walking through a village is like a gust of wind through a still room, quiet but unsettling. Most don't live in your village. They belong to lords, to castles, to the layers of authority that ripple down from the top. But they come through, on errands, on patrol, sometimes just passing. And when they do, people notice. Conversations pause, bows deepen. No one looks too long. Not all samurai are cruel, and not all peasants are afraid. But there is a line, and it's been burned into place over centuries. The law is simple. Insult a samurai, lose your head. Literally. A peasant's life is cheap. A samurai's honor, priceless. They train constantly, even in peace. Sword drills in the courtyard, archery in the fields, horseback riding when space allows. Children sneak glances from behind fences, mimicking stances with sticks. Some dream of becoming warriors themselves. Most grow out of it, usually after one harsh winter reminds them that dreams don't fill bellies. Samurai don't just fight. They write poetry, study calligraphy, debate philosophy. In theory, at least. It depends on the man. Some prefer ink to blood. Others just like the idea of appearing refined while still being terrifying. Their armor, when worn, is a blend of function and flourish. Lacquered plates tied together with cords. A face mask that turns a man into a demon. And yet, when removed, the same man might sip tea slowly, murmuring about the sound of wind through bamboo. Duality is part of the job. You rarely speak to them. Most of your contact comes in the form of orders. Fix this road, offer that rice, bow deeper next time. But on rare days, one might pause to ask a question, to nod in passing, or to leave behind a word of thanks. It's enough to talk about for weeks. Samurai cast long shadows, and even when they're gone, the shape of that shadow lingers, quietly, unavoidably. As the sun dips behind the rolling hills, shadows stretch across the rice fields, and the scent of smoke begins to drift from clay chimneys. It's the soft arrival of evening, and the village exhales in unison. There's no rush, just rhythm. Fires are stoked for warmth, not urgency. Meals are slow, built from whatever was pulled from the soil that day. Pickled daikon, miso soup, maybe a scrap of fish if someone was lucky at the river. The rice is always there, plain but steady. It anchors everything. Inside the homes, simple wooden structures with sliding paper walls. Light comes from oil lamps. It flickers, casting shadows that dance across tatami floors. The heat from the hearth settles into the room like a blanket, loosening shoulders, softening voices. Children, barefoot and still dusty, gather near parents, recounting games, half-truths, and wildly exaggerated bug sightings. Laughter is quiet but real, the kind that belongs to people who've worked with their hands and no rest must be earned. In one corner, a grandfather hums an old tune while whittling. In another, a mother patches a kimono by lamplight. The rhythm of her needle matches the gentle crackle of firewood. Outside, frogs begin their nightly chorus, competing with the creaking of wooden beams and the distant howl of wind through the forest canopy. Every now and then, someone steps outside to check the sky, not for the weather, but for the stars. On clear nights, the Milky Way looks like a river of salt spilled across the heavens. There are names for constellations, myths that explain them, but tonight, no one needs a story. The sky tells its own. There is no clock to watch, no schedule to meet. Sleep arrives when it pleases. Some doze upright by the fire, others curl on woven mats. The village dims one house at a time, like lanterns being snuffed by the breeze. And in that stillness, punctuated only by the slow hiss of embers, you feel something ancient, not dramatic, not loud, just enduring. The quiet heartbeat of a life lived close to the land, to each other, and to time itself. Here, night doesn't end the day. It carries it forward, softly, into dreams. As the last household embers fade, and even the frogs begin to hush, the village enters its quietest state, when sleep takes over, but the world does not entirely rest. This is the hour of in-between, not quite night, not yet dawn, not quite silence, not without presence. In feudal Japan, people believed that dreams were not just reflections of the mind, but messages, sometimes from ancestors, sometimes from something stranger. A flicker in the corner of one's eye, a shifting shadow, a fox that lingers a little too long by the edge of the woods. These were signs, not frightening necessarily, just noticed. The boundary between the seen and the unseen was thinner at this hour. Paper walls did little to stop a breeze or a wandering thought. A bamboo mat was not just a bed. It was a raft drifting through a sea of mystery. Most villagers had a talisman near the door, or above the bed, something simple, a carved charm, a folded piece of paper tied with red thread, not because they feared what came at night, but because they respected it. A child might dream of flying across mountain peaks or talking with animals. A farmer might dream of lost tools reappearing. A mother might dream of her own mother, now long gone, walking beside her without speaking a word. Each dream, whether odd or mundane, was shared over breakfast as if it were news from another village. Even the animals moved differently. Cats slinked more carefully. Roosters, those notorious early risers, stayed quiet, just for a while. And the dogs, if there were any in the village, watched the darkness with slow blinks, as if they too were keeping vigil. There's a particular kind of peace that comes from this slow space between days. No need to explain it. No reason to name it. It's just there, in the way breath slows, in the creak of wood as it settles, in the warmth held in walls long after the fire goes out. In the distance, a wind chime tings softly in the night air, not from wind, but from memory perhaps. Or maybe it's just the house breathing, and so sleep deepens, time thins, and the village, still and small, floats gently between yesterday and what's to come. Before the sky turns blue, before the birds begin their morning disputes over rooftops, the very first signs of waking begin, not loud or abrupt, but subtle, like the earth itself drawing in a slow breath. In one home, a kettle is placed gently over a low flame, not because anyone is fully awake, but because someone always is, usually an older woman, already wrapping her hair, already thinking about rice. Her movements are practiced, almost meditative. No wasted steps, no sharp sounds. Just the quiet choreography of someone who has seen many mornings and expects many more. Outside, mist still clings to the thatch rooftops and the bark of trees. The paths between homes are dark and damp, marked only by the footprints of cats, or the occasional wandering chicken, who never quite learn the bedtime rules. A low murmur comes from the rice fields, a frog maybe, or just the wind shifting through tall stalks that weren't there months ago. In this early moment, time itself seems shy, as if it doesn't want to interrupt too soon. Doors slide open with a soft shoosh. A man steps out, scratching his head, already squinting at the horizon, even though there's nothing to see yet. His wooden sandals clack against the earth as he walks toward the well. Not in a rush, not really awake either, just beginning. There's a comforting repetition to it all. The same tasks, the same paths, the same rhythms day after day. And yet no two mornings ever feel identical. The way the air moves, the way the dew settles, the way someone hums an old folk song under their breath without realizing it. These tiny details shape each day like fingers shaping soft clay. Inside the homes, children shift under blankets. The smell of miso and charcoal smoke starts to thread its way through narrow corridors. A rooster tries his first crow, off-key, half-hearted, but with conviction. Someone laughs at it, quietly, just once. Soon there will be chores and noise and plans, but not yet. For now, the village is still in the in-between, not asleep, not fully awake, balanced perfectly in that brief, beautiful moment when the world hasn't quite decided to start. The scent of cooking rice is one of the first true declarations that a day has begun. It seeps from kitchens like a quiet announcement, drifting through open windows and along winding paths. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady, warm, and unmistakably present. In most households, the morning meal is simple, but never thoughtless. A bowl of rice, freshly steamed, a bit of pickled radish or plum, maybe some miso soup if there was time to make broth the night before. For families lucky enough to keep a few hens, there might even be an egg, soft-boiled, nestled carefully on top of the rice. A rare indulgence, but cherished when it happens. The family doesn't always sit together. The children are often fidgeting, already thinking about the day ahead. Chores, games, who has the best spinning top. The parents eat with more deliberate calm, knowing the energy they need to carry them through hours of labor under sun and sky. Meals are quiet affairs, not out of solemnity, but efficiency. There's work to be done, and no one needs reminding. In a wealthier home, breakfast might come with a few more dishes. Grilled fish, seaweed, a ceramic dish of pickled greens arranged just so. But even then, it's not about luxury. It's about balance. Hot and cold, salty and mild. Each bite is designed to steady the stomach and the mind. The tea is poured without ceremony. No grand rituals, just habit. The warmth seeps into hands holding the cup, still stiff from sleep. A grandmother blows on hers before sipping, her breath making small rings of steam. She's done this 1,000 times. She'll do it 1,000 more. There's a comfort in this repetition. The same table, the same clatter of chopsticks, the same pot with a little crack in the handle that no one talks about but everyone notices. Outside, someone's already sweeping the path in front of their house. Dust rises lazily in the sunlight. A neighbor calls out a greeting, not shouted, just loud enough to be heard. And just like that, the village is awake, not rushed, not noisy, but undeniably alive, anchored by rice, soup, and the knowledge that another day, just like the ones before, is beginning exactly as it should. Feudal Japan's roads were as varied as the people who walked them. Some were wide and carefully maintained, particularly those leading to major cities or shrines. Others were little more than dirt paths worn into the land by generations of feet, hooves, and wheels. Wherever they led, roads were the veins of the country, quietly pulsing with the movement of life. Most travel was done on foot, sandals of straw slapped against packed dirt, and walking sticks tapped with each step like a slow drumbeat. Horses were rare and precious, usually reserved for samurai or official envoys. If you were lucky, you might share a handcart with a neighbor heading in the same direction, though you'd better not mind a bumpy ride. On any given day, the road might play host to a farmer leading an ox cart full of vegetables, a travelling monk in patched robes offering prayers and stories, or a merchant weighed down by crates of lacquerware. There were no rest stops, no mile markers, but there were roadside tea stalls, tiny huts with tatami mats and boiling kettles, offering weary travellers a chance to rest their feet and sip something hot. Post towns dotted the longer routes, offering food, shelter, and occasional gossip. These towns had a rhythm of their own, daytime noise as vendors hawked goods and porters unloaded goods, then quiet nights broken only by laughter from sake shops or the creak of doors being locked against the dark. Travellers knew to keep an eye out for checkpoints. The shogunate didn't take lightly to movement without purpose. Official passes were often required, especially for those moving between domains. The guards weren't always strict, but they never smiled. A bag could be searched. A question asked twice, just to see if your story changed. Then there were the pilgrims, walking for days, weeks, even months. Straw hats shading their eyes, white robes fluttering with each step. They were searching for enlightenment or forgiveness, or maybe just the quiet company of temples. No one questioned the pilgrim's path. Some roads were sacred. The roads themselves held stories, not written in ink, but in grooves worn into the stone from cartwheels or the layers of footprints packed into the earth. To walk them was to follow in countless other steps, some hurried, some heavy, some never finished. And above all, always the same sky, following you no matter where you went. Not all of feudal Japan's life unfolded in fields or homes. Some of it played out along the riverbanks, where the land met water and the everyday found its rhythm in the soft lap of currents. Rivers weren't just scenery. They were resources, roads, borders, and sometimes a kind of stage. In the early hours, the banks stirred with activity. Fishermen crouched low near the shallows, casting weighted nets with a motion practiced since childhood. Some paddled out in narrow boats, their silhouettes rippling in the misty light, hoping to return with fresh ayu or carp to sell at the market. Fishing wasn't glamorous, but it fed families, and if the fish were plump, maybe the neighbors too. Women came down with wooden tubs, balancing them on their hips like extensions of themselves. Here, laundry wasn't just a chore. It was a kind of social hour. They'd wash, scrub, rinse, and chat. Bits of local news floated down the river faster than the current. A new birth, a sick neighbor, a surprise visit from the local official. Nothing escaped the wash-line grapevine. Children played dangerously close to the water, toes skimming the surface as they dared each other to go deeper. Sometimes a boy would slip and earn a scolding, or worse, silence from a mother too exhausted to yell again. But most learned fast. Falling in once was usually enough. The river also provided clay for pots, reeds for basket weaving, and water for the rice paddies that shimmered just beyond its banks. It was a provider, though not always generous. Storms could turn it wild, and floods could erase a season's worth of work in one angry afternoon. But even then, the people returned. They always did. At night, the river changed. Lanterns from nearby homes flickered in its surface, making it look alive in a different way. Frogs croaked. Insects hummed. A fisherman might stay out late, hoping for a final catch. And sometimes, a pair of lovers, real or imagined, sat quietly beneath the trees, saying nothing at all, letting the water carry away whatever words weren't needed. The river didn't ask questions. It simply moved forward, just like the people who lived beside it. Though most villagers in feudal Japan lived lives untouched by swords or scrolls, the presence of the shogunate was always there, subtle, distant, but undeniable. It didn't matter if you were a rice farmer, a merchant, or a fisherman. The laws of the land were written far above your station, and yet they shaped your every day. Most people never saw a samurai in full armor, let alone the shogun himself. But the effects of their rule were stitched into daily rhythms. Tax collectors came twice a year, measuring rice yields with methodical precision. Their visits were rarely welcome, but always respected. Arguing with them was like shaking your fist at Mount Fuji. Impressive for a moment, but ultimately pointless. The hierarchy of the time was rigid, and most folks accepted it without protest. The emperor was revered, distant as the stars. The shogun ruled in his name, controlling the land through daimyos, regional lords who, in turn, commanded the samurai. Everyone else, peasants, artisans, merchants, occupied the lower rungs. It was not a ladder one climbed. It was a structure one lived within. Still, for all its weight, this structure also provided stability. Roads were patrolled, markets were regulated. Crimes were judged swiftly, often harshly, but with a logic the people could predict. In a world without modern law books or digital surveillance, predictability was worth its weight in silver. Samurai occasionally rode through villages, messengers, tax enforcers, or protectors in times of unrest. They didn't always speak, but they didn't need to. Their presence was reminder enough. Children stared, elders bowed. Some whispered old stories about Ronin or daring rebellions, usually with the windows closed. The village headman acted as the middleman, translating the edicts of distant rulers into everyday rules. He collected taxes, settled disputes, and occasionally passed down news from the wider world. A change in leadership, a new road plan, rumors of war. Most villagers listened, nodded, and then went back to pounding rice or feeding chickens. Power didn't feel close in feudal Japan. It felt like weather, unpredictable, larger than life, and beyond one's control. But like weather, it was adapted to. The wise farmer paid his dues, showed respect, and planted his rice with care. Not because he feared the shogun would visit, but because he knew the system worked better when he didn't draw attention. As the sun climbed, so did the hum of the village market. It wasn't the biggest affair, just a wide, dusty path lined with wooden stalls and woven mats. But it was alive. This was where news travelled faster than horses and coins, changed hands with practiced ease. And in a society where status was everything, the market was one of the few places where rules blurred just a little. Merchants, technically ranked near the bottom of the social hierarchy, were often wealthier than those above them. A well-placed cloth dealer or sake brewer could quietly accumulate more koku than a minor samurai, and with far less risk of getting stabbed. Not that they flaunted it. In feudal Japan, the art of subtlety extended to finances. Flashy displays invited questions, and questions invited taxes. Or worse, attention. A typical vendor's stall was neat but bursting with goods. Stacks of rice crackers, lacquered combs, bundles of herbs, coils of rope, even the occasional mirror polished so finely it felt like magic. Each merchant had their rhythm. Calls to passing customers, rehearsed jokes, a practiced smile that stayed on even when coins were slow. People came to the market for more than shopping. It was the village's social engine. You might meet a distant cousin there, share gossip about someone's pig getting loose, or learn about a wedding in the next village. Children darted through the crowd. Mothers haggled over pickled plums, and old men hovered near the tea vendor, grumbling about prices and their backs in equal measure. For artisans, the market was a stage. The blacksmith displayed his latest tools, the potter arranged bowls by size and shine, and the weaver ran her fingers proudly along newly dyed fabric. Each item carried hours of labor, and each sale was a small reward, not just of coin, but of recognition. The samurai passed through occasionally, eyes sharp and hands near their hilts. Most ignored the stalls, but a few lingered near the calligraphy stand, pretending to consider brushes while listening to town gossip. Information was a currency too, after all. By midday, the market swelled and then slowly began to thin. Vendors counted coins, packed goods, and traded end-of-day barbs with their neighbors. Another day, another handful of copper. Not rich, not grand, but enough. In the careful balance of feudal life, sometimes enough was the closest thing to power a person could hope for. Tucked behind the larger homes, through narrow paths of stepping stones and slatted fences, were the gardens. Not the sprawling, overgrown kind that beg for pruning, but precise, deliberate spaces where every leaf seemed to know its role. Even the rocks had attitudes. These gardens weren't for vegetables or showy flowers. They were for breathing, for thinking, for listening to silence. A raked gravel patch, carefully combed into concentric circles, might look like nothing to a passerby. But to the person who maintained it, each groove was a meditation, one that unraveled the clutter of the mind just as surely as it organized the ground. Moss crept along the shaded edges of stone lanterns. Bamboo whispered against itself in the breeze, sounding a little like wind chimes and a little like secrets. Water trickled from a bamboo spout into a stone basin, rhythmically and without fanfare. Every now and then, a frog would add commentary with a low, lazy croak. The head of the household might sit cross-legged on a raised wooden veranda, sipping tea with slow, practiced movements. Children weren't forbidden from the garden, but they learned quickly that this wasn't a place for tag or noisy games. If anything, it was a place to hide from chores under the guise of contemplation. An old trick, but a good one. The garden was also where scrolls were read, poetry was written, and quiet arguments were had in hushed tones. Even disputes bowed to decorum here. One might hear the phrase, "Let us discuss this in the garden," which was code for, "Let's argue quietly so the neighbors don't hear." For the elderly, gardens were a kind of farewell letter to the world. Some spent hours trimming a single bush or adjusting the angle of one stone. They knew they wouldn't see many more seasons, but they wanted the garden to outlast them, to continue offering stillness long after their voices had faded. In a world defined by duty, hierarchy, and ritual, the garden offered something strange, unspoken freedom. You couldn't shout in it, and you couldn't escape your status within it, but you could pause, you could exist. For a few minutes, surrounded by gravel and green, being still was enough. Despite the order and obligation that framed daily life, feudal Japan was not all structure and solemnity. When festival days arrived, the usual rhythm was disrupted in the best possible way. Laughter slipped through the alleys. Drums echoed across rice paddies. Rules, for just a little while, softened around the edges. There were many kinds of festivals, some to honor gods, others to mark the seasons, and a few that just gave people an excuse to be loud and eat something fried. Lanterns were strung between wooden poles, their flickering glow giving the illusion that stars had descended to street level. Bright fabrics fluttered on makeshift stalls, selling skewered snacks, painted fans, and masks that grinned too widely. Children darted through the crowds with sticky fingers and wide eyes. Some wore small yukata, their sleeves too long and their sandals always half off. Elders sat near the back of the gathering, watching the chaos with that mix of affection and exhaustion, reserved for people who used to dance but now prefer not to. Street performers juggled, balanced, and occasionally dropped things to the delight of the watching crowd. Puppet shows unfolded on tiny stages, telling exaggerated tales of brave samurai or foolish goblins. Somewhere, always, someone was banging on a taiko drum, with a kind of energy only available to those temporarily freed from adult responsibilities. Food was part of the ritual. Grilled fish, rice cakes, sweets dusted with powder or drizzled with syrup. It was less about sustenance and more about indulgence. Even those who normally counted every grain of rice took seconds. And then there were the masks. Foxes, demons, spirits. Each had a story, a function, or a joke behind it. People wore them for fun, for anonymity, or simply because pretending to be someone else, even for an hour, felt liberating. It wasn't uncommon for a usually stern merchant to dance like a fool behind a fox mask, only to return to serious negotiations the next morning as if nothing had happened. Festivals didn't erase hardship, but they made room for joy. They reminded people, farmers, nobles, and children alike, that beauty didn't have to come in the form of control. Sometimes it came in the shape of a paper lantern swaying in the breeze, or a child's laughter cutting through the night. And then, as the fire dimmed and the crowd thinned, everything slowly settled back into place. like a drumbeat fading into silence. As twilight descended over the village, the world dimmed into softer shapes. Lanterns flickered on one by one, their yellow glow pushing gently against the dusk. The air, once warm with effort and activity, cooled with the promise of rest. Smoke curled from cook fires, doors creaked shut, conversations dropped to whispers. Evening meals were modest but comforting. Bowls of rice, pickled vegetables, maybe miso soup if ingredients allowed. Families gathered on tatami mats, knees tucked under low tables. They didn't rush. There was no hurry now. The sun had completed its path, and so had they. Some households lingered a little longer, retelling stories passed down from grandfathers or sharing jokes from the rice fields. In wealthier homes, perhaps a biwa or shamisen provided soft music. In others, the lullaby was the steady sound of insects beyond the shoji screens and the rustle of leaves in the night wind. Children yawned exaggeratedly, not because they were truly tired, but because it earned them the right to curl up first. Older siblings teased. Parents pretended not to notice. Then, one by one, the household slipped into quiet. Futons were unrolled from their storage chests, placed carefully on straw-covered floors. Heads rested on bean-filled pillows. Those who lived in more humble quarters simply lay down where space allowed, wrapped in woven blankets that smelled faintly of smoke and grass. Sleep came gradually. The body, still humming from the day's labor, needed time to slow. But there was peace in that slowing. No urgency, no flickering screens. Just the natural pull of darkness and the soft rhythm of breath. Some villagers believed dreams were glimpses into other lives. Others thought dreams were just leftover bits of thought, stirred by the spirits of the night. Regardless, sleep was a shared ritual, an act of surrender that transcended class, duty, and era. And so the day ended not with fanfare, but with stillness. A flickering lamp finally extinguished. The coals in the fire pit dimmed to red. Somewhere, a dog barked once. A neighbor coughed. Then silence. In that silence, feudal Japan did what it always did. It continued, quietly, unseen, but never entirely still. And in the hush of sleep, another day waited patiently in the wings, ready to begin the moment the sun touched the eaves once more. Past midnight, the village didn't sleep as soundly as it seemed. Beneath the blanket of stillness, subtle rhythms persisted, the kind you wouldn't hear unless you listened closely. Creaking floorboards, a distant owl, the soft snort of a horse shifting in its stall. Some men took turns on quiet patrols, walking the narrow paths with lanterns in hand. Not samurai, not warriors, but appointed villagers. Their job wasn't to fight off invaders, it was to notice. A suspicious shadow, a loose roof tile, a door left ajar. It was vigilance in its simplest form. One might stop and stretch, take a sip of tea from a lacquered gourd, and watch as fireflies danced lazily near the rice fields. A few homes still flickered with activity. A mother soothed a colicky child, rocking gently while humming an old tune. An elderly man with aching knees sat awake, legs folded, staring at the moonlight leaking through the bamboo slats. Sleep didn't come easily for everyone, and no one minded much. There was no pressure to be alert at dawn, just a soft understanding that rest would find you eventually. Farther out, near the edge of the forest, small shrines caught the silver light. Offerings left at dusk, bowls of sake, small coins, rice wrapped in leaves, glinted faintly. No one was out to see them, but perhaps that was the point. The gods and spirits that watched over the fields weren't looking for ceremony. They wanted consistency, a sign that someone still remembered them. Foxes crept along the perimeter of homes, occasionally bold enough to nose open a basket or two. Cats, half wild, wholly uninterested in ownership, watched from rooftops, their tails flicking like pendulums. You couldn't really call them pets. They simply lived here too, tolerated because they kept mice from the grain stores and occasionally looked mystical enough to inspire a poem. Midnight in the village wasn't silent. It was simply hushed. It carried an understanding that this time wasn't wasted. It was transition, a breath between the inhale and exhale of days, the kind of pause you never find in textbooks, but everyone once knew in their bones. And somewhere, behind paper walls and wooden beams, someone stirred in their sleep, rolled over, and exhaled softly. The night continued, steady, slow, and unconcerned with whether anyone noticed. Before the sky even considered turning blue, life in the village began to hum again. Not loudly, not all at once, but with a kind of practiced grace that came from doing it every day without question. A rooster crowed, not because anyone needed the reminder, but because it was his job, and he took it very seriously. The sound rolled over the rooftops like a wave, waking those lightest in sleep. Soon after came the second rooster, less punctual, slightly hoarser. He was the backup, just in case the first one took a morning off. He never did. Inside the homes, embers in the hearth were coaxed back to life. A few brisk puffs of air and the careful placement of fresh kindling gave way to soft orange glow. The warmth was welcome, even in spring. Morning chill clung to the floor like it had nothing better to do. Women tied back their hair and poured water from clay jugs into wooden basins. The splash echoed gently. Teeth were rubbed with salt and twigs, faces splashed with cold water sharp enough to wake even the deepest dreamers. The ritual wasn't about vanity. It was about presence, about greeting the day with a clear head, clean hands, and no traces of sleep on your face. In the fields, early risers were already there. Farmers moved among the furrows, checking young shoots for pests. They didn't need full daylight to see what was important. They knew the color of healthy leaves, the feel of damp soil between the toes. Their sense of time wasn't bound to a clock, but to the pace of the sun and the readiness of the earth. At the riverbank, the sound of washing stones against fabric marked another kind of work. Kimono sleeves slapped against flat rocks, sending up tiny sprays of cold water. Women chatted in low voices, nothing urgent, just the kind of chatter that filled the air when silence got too heavy. A child yawned loudly and was promptly handed a broom, not because they were in trouble, but because the dust didn't sweep itself and little hands had to learn somehow. Dawn wasn't ceremonial. It was quiet and chore-laced and somehow beautiful in its lack of drama. The village didn't rise like a shout. It exhaled into the new day, soft and slow, as if stretching its limbs before standing. And so the day winds down. The market thins, the laughter fades. What was once a murmur of footsteps and bartering now quiets into the soft sweep of brooms and the rustle of evening wind. Stalls are packed, goods are counted, and stories from the day are tucked away like folded cloth. The scent of cooking rice wafts over rooftops, and distant temple bells chime the fading light. Back in the village homes, lamps flicker, casting gentle shadows across wooden walls. Children drift to sleep on tatami mats, curl beside their siblings or the family dog, while adults whisper about planting, debts, and dreams. Not everything is perfect. Not everything is easy. But the rhythm of life continues, slow and steady as the turning seasons. Tomorrow, the rice will need tending. The miso will need stirring. The sandals will need mending. But tonight, everything is still, whole, and for once, enough. So if you're still here, listening, breathing, let the quiet carry you. Let the past rest gently around you like a blanket worn soft with age. Because though this world is long gone, for a little while, we lived in it again, and that too is enough. Good night.